Hey everyone, this is Dan McGuire here. I am gonna do a little walkthrough. Let's build that to-do app that I showed in my Elixir conf, or at least most of the parts of it. Maybe all of it. We'll see how we're doing on time. Start off. Let's see. We're on Elixir version 173 with OTP 21. I'm using Phoenix 1.4. We're gonna be using Texas 0.3.1, Texas JS 0.3.18. That'll give you an idea of how old this thing is. For anybody watching this in the future. But this is kind of the to-do MVC application is what I was attempting to build to just kind of show off the functionality of Texas. And here's a template that they give us. So they give us some CSS and HTML that we're interested in. The biggest difference is, and I'm not going to make you watch me edit HTML and CSS, is the biggest difference is I changed these check boxes to buttons, and the same thing for this div. It's because they've got JavaScript to target any element they want. Well, Texas kind of gives you nice features for dealing with forms to kind of get you back to writing actual HTML. Stop doing all the like JavaScript weird stuff, like divs were never really meant to be clicked to send data back to the server, right? That's what we have forms for. So Texas has a little bit of an opinionated approach about that, but also Texas doesn't really care how you get data to your server either. Texas is more interested in how you update your views, and I'll let you watch my ElixirConf talk if you want some more philosophy about Texas, but let's get into this to-do, maybe get you a little warmed up so you're confident in playing with this library yourself. Okay, so we've got the HTML and CSS. I've already got it. I've already kind of changed the stuff, so I don't really want to do that again. So I'm just going to kind of copy and paste from the example Texas app that you can see on GitLab. Let's get this plain HTML right here, and I'll kind of talk about, actually, let's make the project, so mixphoenix.new, call this YouTube tutorial. No ecto. I don't care about ecto for this. I don't want to make this any more complicated than I need to. Wait, what? YouTube tutorial. Now let's try it. Cool. And yeah, this is going to be like a real rough video. I apologize, but I don't like spending a whole lot of time post edits and whatnot. So, yeah. I just want to give you guys some context to maybe build your confidence, and maybe one of y'all will do a better getting started video. That would be greatly appreciated. Anybody who wants to do some like blog posts and like marketing and whatnot for these ideas, be my guest. I'd rather be fumbling around with the code and writing terrible code and having someone else smarter come behind me and fix it later. But we're installing a Phoenix application. This is Phoenix 1.4, like I said earlier. This is not even like the release of 1.4. I don't even know if there's a release candidate out yet. I think it's coming soon, but it's pretty complete. So I'm going ahead and using it just because. YouTube tut. Cool. So first thing we want to do, let's go ahead and install Texas first. We'll kind of walk through all the parts of that. So let's go to our router first of all, because the first thing that Texas is going to touch is this plug pipeline, and we're going to need a texas.plug, and before we can do that, obviously we've got to install Texas, so let's do that real quick. And Texas, what version is it at? It was at 0.3.1, and then assets package.json. Let's get the JavaScript installed as well. And Texas JS, that was at 0.3.18, 0.3.18. Let's install both of these. Mix deps.get, go over here, we'll jump into the assets folder, npm install. So, okay, we've installed Texas, dependencies there, npm is going to take a little bit longer. And bam, don't even have time to drink coffee. Sweet. Cool, so that is presumably installed. So the first thing that web request is going to touch is this plug. I'll let you watch the talk if you want to get deep into detail. So that's there. I guess we can just actually follow the documentation. That's probably a good idea. So the next thing after installing is it wants us to set up our WebSocket channels and stuff. So we'll just copy and paste this. Get a new tab, go to assets.js, app.js, and delete this stuff. Okay, I know that I don't want this default socket stuff, so I'm gonna go ahead and assets socket delete. So it joins a topic subtopic channel by default. I know I don't want that, but I do want the socket to be connected. So the socket's connected, we're exporting it here. We get the socket right here, and we're gonna pass it to Texas's instantiation right here. So Texas is not gonna try and take over your socket, but it does want to use the socket. So that's how you start up Texas. No more JavaScript should be necessary for the rest of this tutorial. That's one really awesome thing about Texas, is that you don't need to write your own application level JavaScript, and the JavaScript that you need to send to your client is super small. We're talking like a couple hundred lines, over a couple, like less than 300 lines of JavaScript, like uncompressed, to the client in order to use Texas, right? Other than like the Phoenix JS stuff. I'm not sure how big that is. Right, so we've got the socket stuff not quite set up, so let's go into the channels. It is using the channels abstraction, and our default socket is user socket, so I believe this Texas.socket that I need to put here. Is that what it? Yeah, so we'll use Texas socket, just did that. Let's get some configuration in place. Texas likes to reuse a lot of Phoenix stuff. Phoenix got some great stuff, so Texas reuses it. And what I'm referring to there, that's not what I wanted. Config. Is that what I wanted? No. Let's just go through it here. So config, there we are. That's where I thought I'd be. Cool, so we're doing this right here. So we're configuring the pub sub. Texas wants to reuse your default pub sub. And our application is this thing. Let's just change this thing to YouTube tut web. Cool. So that did it for both. And the router, it does need to know about your routing stuff, so it can take a WebSocket message and route it to the function inside of your controller. So it needs to know where your router lives. Then of course the templating engine is setting up right there. That should be enough to get the configuration in place. We already put the plug in place. So we'll need to import the Texas controller so we can get access to some functions. These are just like, but we don't even have a to-do controller yet. So first thing, let's just kind of show that our static content looks the way we would expect. Get our CSS imported, and let's just call this to-do CSS and make that to-do.css. Let's get rid of this Phoenix CSS, I don't want it. Get this to-do CSS, and this will be all this stuff right here. I got that, almost all that's like it's basically straight pulled from to-do VC. Like I said earlier, I did have to do some changes. Make sure I'm recording too. Yeah, sweet. So to-do CSS, got that. Now let's just go to our page template and delete all this stuff. Wonderful thing about TEX, or the Texas templating engine, is this just pure, the templating is all pure or HTML rather. So I can just throw it right in there with an EX tag or whatever. Doesn't really matter. And we should be able to, after we start the server, compile everything. After we start the server, we should be able to see our static. Should be able to see kind of like the basic structure of our stuff. It's a static application, has nothing dynamic about it yet. Texas hasn't really come into play. But this is kind of like the view first stuff I was talking about. You can just get some like HTML and CSS in place. And bam, we've kind of got what looks like a to-do app. You know, it doesn't really do anything at all. But it looks like our structure. We could, you know, put some prototype data in there like they do right here, you know, give it more of a look, but we're not too focused on HTML and CSS right now. I just want to show you all Texas. So, but yeah, so like just HTML and CSS, you can get the structure up in place with Texas, which is a pretty important property of the library. But let's go ahead and make everything under like the to-do scope, right? So to-do next.html.text, because we use the Texas. Well, that was not what I wanted. Yes, get rid of that. To-do, and then under to-do, index.html.text. Cool. And then let's copy this over. This is what we actually want. Let's go to our router and make sure our router's pointing at that so it uses that. So it's like pointing at page controller right here. But we're going to change it to controller, which means we need to go make a controller to do controller. And we'll do kind of the same thing here. Let's get this page controller. Why is that not showing up? Whatever, let's do this. Page controller and this. Cool. So we'll just kind of copy paste this. Yeah. Turn it to a to-do controller. Import Texas.controller. Make sure that's actually what Texas wanted. Yeah, so Texas controller. And that's going to give us this function right here that we're going to use. Texas render. And it's going to take, it's just a thin wrapper around the Phoenix, render function. I don't want to go into too much detail there because it really doesn't, it probably won't mess you up too much just to know that you need to use the Texas render functions. And let's just go ahead and use our to-do view that we have not made yet with the data function. What does matter is that, this will be kind of important, this is just like an easy way to pass this data structure that we expect as the third argument. So let's go make a view. Views are where I plan to keep all my dynamic stuff. And we'll just copy this structure too. To do view. And the first thing I like to do is get this this top level data function. That's what I'm passing right here. I'll just get rid of this stuff so you can see that better. So this data function is getting called right here, and what it needs is a keyword list with Texas key and then a map of the functions that match the properties. So the properties inside of our template, and the template is just pure HTML. Let me set the syntax here. Set syntax HTML. Cool. So even though this is a .tex file, it's now got the syntax. So these Texas properties here. So we got a to-do list, a list count, and the filters. These three properties are important to us because we want them to contain dynamic content. So the to-do list right here, obviously it needs to have all of our to-do items when we input them. This span right here, the list count, is going to be showing us this one item left, and then the filters are these things right here. So those are the dynamic components of this application. We need to have functions that know how to render the dynamic content out, right? So currently, and this is a very alpha library, all this stuff might change really quickly out from under you, so I apologize about that. But yeah, so these are the properties we're concerned about. So we need to have functions corresponding to those properties. So we'll go ahead and make functions that correspond to them. So def, and let's see, what did we have? We had to-do list, and all these do need to take a connection struct. That's just because connection is going to contain some important potentially important information in there. For this tutorial, we're not going to actually use it, but in the future, like if you have something, if you have a client that's authenticated and you wanted to be able to render a view that's like in the context of that client, the connection struct would have some information in there that's interesting to you in that context. It doesn't matter for this tutorial because I'm not doing any authentication yet. So we got a list count, and we'll not use, but it does need this. So the important thing to realize is that Texas is going to be calling these functions for you. Like, you're not going to be calling these functions yourself. You're defining these properties, and you're going to broadcast out a message later that says which clients need to update their view, but those client processes are going to be what's calling these functions. So you have to kind of like abide by Texas API. But if you notice, this is super similar to any other template. So far, all we're doing, like, instead of just writing EEX inside of the template right here, we're just moving the code to these functions. Like, it should be really familiar if you've done server render stuff. So now we've got filters here. So I think hopefully you'll be surprised at just how little Texas code you're writing. So really all we're doing right now is very server rendery stuff that could just as easily be EEX, you know, very much the same kind of like workflow, except for now we're breaking our dynamic our dynamic code out of the template and putting it inside of a view module, which I think that's a clean separation anyways. I don't think that writing code inside your templates it's messy for me anyways. Everyone is very much entitled to their own opinion. So this needs to be a map. The key needs to be list of the properties, and then the value needs to be the function that that property needs to call. So really you could have named those functions anything you want, but just for cleanliness, this key is what matters. This key is going to say, hey, call this function whenever you want to update the to-do list. Call this function. List count is the key. List count is also the function name that we gave it. Could have called it anything as long as that key is right. And then, actually, I don't think that's true. I think it both need to match up probably. Honestly, not too sure, even though I wrote this library. Oops. All right, so now we've got this map that's got this that tells us, like, you know, where the functions are that match up to the properties, right? So so far, let me go to my router. Forget if I've changed that to what is do controller? Fantastic. So let's go into the do controller, and our to do controller to do is doing a text rendered connection and calling to do view data. So I need to alias this in, and we'll alias this in here. So like this to do view data. Fantastic. Let's see if this just works right here. Nope. Recompile. YouTube to do view data is on 0. That's why I need to pass in the connection to this thing. So we get the connection from the controller right here in this context. If you're passing the message down the WebSocket, that connection will actually be the socket struct. But yeah, you don't need to worry about the internals too much. So argument area called with 2 arguments, 2 nil. I don't think I've finished setting up Texas. And so this is how you know it's a alpha library. These arguments don't tell you anything. That's unfortunate. And I know exactly what it is. I need to return from those functions the necessary things that allow the templating engine to work. And in the future we'll have better error messages. But for right now, just know that this is kind of internal to the templating engine. Like I said, really rough library. But we need to get some dynamic content for these things, right? So let's get an HTML string for all this stuff. For all of them right now, let's just give an empty div just to get this code working. And so something that's interesting right now that will be abstracted away from the developer in the future probably is that we need to parse this into AST. This is necessary for the templating engine for reasons I won't go into, but we're going to use floki.parse, and that'll parse into AST for us, and yeah, Texas will know how to deal with it then. So all you need to know is you need to build an HTML string out with these view functions, and that's how you're going to make it dynamic. You're going to do your dynamic stuff in here. So you need to build an HTML element out to for Floki parse to send to the front end. Let's see, yeah. So now it just works. And if we inspect this, I'm actually kind of curious what all is here. Where are my Texas things at? I haven't looked at this in a while. So, okay, so I don't see the Texas property. Huh. Button, input, autocomplete, name, new, to do, what can be done. All right. This must have actually just like deleted them for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why. But what we want to do is, let's just start with the to-do list. So this is an unordered list. So this actually needs to be, this is, essentially you can think of this as replacing that unordered list, right? So we can just get that to-do list class in there. And actually we didn't necessarily need to do that, but just for purposes of this tutorial and keeping the parity between these two things so it's maybe easier to reason about, we get this to-do list that needs to render out what we actually want this to-do list. So let's get a list here. It's just got test inside of it. And I'll actually go back and get some of the CSS and stuff from the other thing. Yeah, so you can see this doesn't have the, but this did render out test. It put it in there for us. So that's how we're going to get dynamic data in here. So let's go look at our other application. And actually, I'll just look at through here. And working on doc, sample Texas app, fantastic. Let's go look at some of the functions in there, and we'll just kind of copy and paste. It'll make it a little bit easier to keep us short on time. So views, to-do view, and let's look at what our to-do list is doing. To-do list. Cool. So we're using this build HTML. So inside of the HTML, I wanted to keep kind of parity between this to-do and VC apps. So it doesn't really probably need all of this HTML, but I was using it. So let's go ahead and copy this into our application. This will just be a private function that's only called in the context of this module. Oops. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bunch. So this is the list that we're building, and you can see it's got a bunch of classes and stuff, and that's the stuff that the to-do and VC gave us. I really just wanted to kind of keep parity with that. So we're going to build these out dynamically. So this builds a single list element right here, this build HTML. And then I can, for every one of our list items, and I will have to set up some persistent state there. For every one of our list items, I can build that HTML, parse it out with Floki, so it's AST, and then stick it inside this. Well, actually, I don't even really need to do that, so we'll do something that's maybe a little more familiar to developers not wanting to worry about AST. So we'll go and do this, and delete this stuff, and we'll call this list HTML. We won't even parse this out yet. This is just going to be for every single list item in here. We're going to build a string that looks like this stuff, right? So now we got a list HTML here, and then we can just put it inside of this unordered list that we had made a second ago, right? So copy this stuff, and we'll wrap it to string. Actually, we can leave it on. And then we will put the list HTML in there. List HTML. And I know the syntax highlighting is broken, but I promise you that it will get interpolated. And the list HTML will be in there. And then we, of course, have to floki.parse. And now we need a list items function, right? So this is kind of where we need to pull from state somewhere. List items. Let's see, what does list items actually expect? Item. Let's see what property. So item apparently has an ID. It has a state, and it has a label. So for right now, let's just kind of like mock up list items, right? Let's just call that list items. List items equals, and it was a map that had an ID. Let's give it 1. Had a label, some label, and it had some state. And I believe, what were the different states? The state could be done, or check if item state equals done, do completed. If item state equals done, do checked. Okay, so those are basically the same thing. So it's either done or something else, right? So we'll just say that the thing is done because we know that's a real thing. And we go back to our application after recompiling. It looks like I'm missing a function in the build HTML. strip tags. Okay, yeah, so that's another thing is right now it does not have sanitization in place, so I'll put this up for the example app so that no one would like publish something to the web and then someone like inject JavaScript via one of the things. We don't really need that for this tutorial. I'll go over some security concerns with Texas because there are a couple of like really interesting security concerns. Hopefully none of y'all try to throw this into production really quick before I can get that video out. But there are some different security concerns with Texas. They're like, there's really only two that I can think of off the top of my head, and they're really simple. But one is that right now there's not a good way to sanitize your output. So like if you have some input, like we're going to be taking input in order to generate this label, right? So we're just interpolating straight to this that we're going to be writing to the website dynamically. If we're not sanitizing that output, then someone could write JavaScript. Like they could write alert hi, and so every time someone went to that page, they would get that alert because it would be written in without being sanitized. So I was doing sanitization there. I don't feel like bringing the sanitization library in right now, so we're just going to take that out. And argument error. Why is that? And the argument error is not going to show us anything because this is a really alpha library and needs to have better. Argument error ID 1 state Erlang apply. What's the deal here? So, oh, this needs to be a list. Bam. So now we've got what we expect. All this stuff is how we expect. Let's just go ahead and make another. And looks like we did a list of maps, so let's just make another map. And we'll put ID 2 in there. We'll do this as active. It's probably works anything other than cool. And we'll call that another label. Cool. So we actually need to get some state going here at this point. That way we can do some updates inside of our controller to change the state, and we can then broadcast out a message to show the state being updated, right? So let's just make an agent for that, right? And I'm gonna copy from this example app again. It's just easier for me than potentially having a typo. So let's get an agent spun up. Library. Where's the application at? So working on docs, application, and you'll see that I'm starting up a persistence process and to do state process. So apparently I've got two different persistence layers. We'll check out. We'll go and put both of them in there, and I'll talk about when I use each one. And so go up here, we'll find our application, and bam. We'll start these agents up. You can see their agents right here. Give them name, some persistence layer, and to-do list state. And this one is being, okay, so this is like for the to-do, for the filters later, right? So this is an empty list to start up. This is where we're going to be putting those maps that the to-do list was calling from, I guess. So some persistence layer, we'll call this to-do list, and we'll to-do list state. I like that. The IDs don't terribly matter to us at the front, so the ID of this process doesn't really matter so much as the name, because the names we're going to be using to calling it. Cool. So we've got to-do list. Let's initialize it with that state that we had mocked out, right? That might be interesting. So this is the state that we mocked it out with. Let's go ahead and put both those in the initial state, and we'll kind of start there. So now both those mocked to-do items are in our to-do list agent. So we can go back here, and instead let's just call agent.get, and it was called to-do list, and we will just send it a function to get everything in a state. And skills are messing up left and right. Cool, so now we can take these list items, pipe them to our deuce, and let's get this all lined up. Cool, so we're going to our agent, we're getting our to-do list, we're piping it into this reduce. It's gonna concatenate all of our state together in as it builds that HTML into a string. So just concatenating a bunch of strings together, and then we're inserting it under this unordered list, and we need to restart our process to get that agent started back up. And it works just like we expect, right? So we've got these in some persistence layer now, an agent in our case. And so we see that that works. Let's go ahead and change that back to an empty list. Now we need to send some data to the server in order to update it and have it reviewed, re-render its view, right? So let's go back to our controller, and let's just define some update, right? And where are my forms at? Okay, so yeah, you can see that since I pulled this template from the other project, that I'm hitting the update with a post. So we also need to go to our router, and we need to kind of get an entry point here. So this is all just like very server, putting the router macro stuff here is all server-side rendering familiar stuff, right? Nothing terribly interesting regarding Texas. If you hit it with an HTTP request, it's going to go straight there. For Texas, it does have the ability to hit it with a WebSocket request, which is interesting, but you don't, as a developer, you don't really have to think about that too much. You can just think about it as getting an HTTP request. So we're doing this post update for the to controller, and we're going to go here. You know what? I always forget that syntax, so we're just going to go back to our other working application, go into the controller, and pull out the update. And this is bad coding practice to just put all of this right here. Like, the controller shouldn't know about how it's updating the persistence layer. You'd probably create your own module, but you know, for the sake of just keep everything kind of succinct so you can see all the all the code that we've written, I'm actually going to just put this all in the controller just so you can see just how little code this took to build. Cool, so update some persistence layer, and I don't want to do this yet, and then I do need to redirect to this index index function. So update some persistence layer, right? Let's for the sake of this example app, I was doing that, but we'll give it a little bit better name. So for the new to do, we'll do this, and you'll see that we're using pattern matching. So whenever we get some params in that has the key with the new to do string, it's going to hit this function. So we just used pattern matching to do a bunch of updates in persistence layer. And I'll just kind of keep that so I don't have to do all the typing. And the data that we're concerned about is right here. It's coming from params, so we use pattern matching to kind of destructure that into a data variable. And we're going to be using that as the label. So whatever we type into that form to submit it back to the server, we're going to kind of grab it in this function and use it to update our agent. So this is our to-do list, and what we're doing here is I'm doing an enum take wraparound so that there's only 25 that show. It just starts scrolling down forever, so I was just like, whatever, I'll limit it to showing 25 items. That was an arbitrary decision, just because I was putting on a Heroku and I didn't want, you know, there to be thousands of messages on there and like crash my Heroku process or something, I guess. So we're taking the list item that we're building right here, which is that map. We had the mocked out map where it had state, has a label, and it has an ID. And Texas brings in this UUID library. It needs that to build the cookie, but just know that we do have access to the UUID because Texas brought it in. It's not part of Phoenix. Yeah, so we're building out this map, and then we're just popping it straight into our persistence layer, right? That's all we're doing there. So now we have a way to update the state. And I can show you that we can update the state by doing this, I think. Let's refresh this page. Actually, we need to get that state out of the agent, so we'll just restart the server, so we're back to nothing. So I've got nothing in here, and I should be able to use this form to post some data back. And it sent the message back to the server, but it didn't update anything. The update parts layer. So it's important to keep note that Texas like completely separates like the updates from the views. It's got a really good like kind of line in the sand with this broadcasted message that lets you just make a distinction between the two. However, when I hit Control Refresh to refresh the page, it's going to do a backend full rendering, and because that state does exist in our agent, it should pop up here. So we'll refresh the page. And we get the test here. Cool. So this is, like I said, I changed this to a button. This is a button. We haven't made this do anything. We haven't made this do anything. We haven't made this do anything. But you can see we can do like 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing showing up. Refresh the page. They're all there. So let's go ahead and make this kind of the complete Texas life cycle and start broadcasting out a message to our clients to let them know to update themselves. So let's kill this. We can start it back, I guess. We just want to take the state out of those agents, so we're working with an empty thing. We want to notify our clients, right? Say, hey, and inside this function, just make this a private function inside our controller. Notify our clients. And it's not going to take any arguments. I think it's probably more idiomatic to do it that way. And the property that, so whenever like Texas is caching the state in the background, you're never seeing the process do this stuff. It's also subscribing to some topics. And so the topic that we're interested in right now is this to-do list. And I need to make a better API around this. So again, I'm going to go back to this. And this is so we're reusing the Phoenix pub sub, and the API for that is broadcasting out a message. And this is what the message looks like right now. It'll change in the future. I'll have a better API for working with that. But we can use, this was called YouTube Tut Web. So this is our endpoint right here. Broadcast a message for Texas Diff, and to-do list the property that we're interested in. So this is going to tell all of our clients that know about this to-do list property, update yourselves. And that's all we have to do for Texas. So we're going to go back to, let's see, and these are all errors I need to clean up. That's just basically saying, hey, I don't know about this client that's trying to, yeah, don't worry about that so much. These errors will be cleaned up. It's just a bug that's kind of inconsequential right now, so I haven't fixed it. So we got no stay here. Now we should, when we press enter, I'm going to open up this to close 4000, close this, make sure both of these, cool. Bam. So Texas broadcasted out a message and it said all clients that are interested in that, update yourselves, right? So all these messages, and Texas is also hijacking this form. So this message is going back over a WebSocket. This part of the application right here, this list is getting, after it's updated, the broadcasted message tells the client each of these browsers have a client process that's doing a diffing in the message, which is the patch, the minimal patch. So in this case, like if I type 5 here, the ideal minimum patch, not exactly the implementation right here, but the ideal minimum patch is that it's just sending us enough message to build this part. Even though the diff is happening against this entire thing, it's only sending us this part, right? So it's a minimal message, it's really fast, as you can tell. Let me see how I'm doing on time. And apparently, holy crap, this is 40 minutes. So yeah, that's kind of basics for Texas right now. I'll come back in a part 2 and finish out the rest of the application and maybe do some authentication to show you just how easy authentication is. We'll just kind of maybe do a little video series once a week or so that'll add a little bit more. Yeah, so that's a really terrible Texas warm-up that took way too long, but there we go. That should at least give you something to get started if you're super interested, but you don't know where to start. Feel free to hit me up on Slack, Twitter, wherever. I'm available to answer questions. Don't have just a whole lot of people that are following me or talking to me right now, so it should be pretty easy to get in contact with me. Thanks for watching.